How's it going, everyone? It's your favorite neighborhood pirate wolf, SilverDFanng, saying, how's it going? More YouTube reactions. We got extra history, the Bonfire of the Vanities, which I didn't realize was literal. It's literally a bonfire of vanity stuff. Really cool. First time looking at the channel. Have fun. Okay. The Bonfire of the Vanities, Italian history.
Florence, February 7th, 1497. Fire alights the Piazza della Signoria as young men throw objects into it, stoking the flames even higher. Every year at this time, Florence celebrates Carnival, a drunken blowout before Lent with masks, indulgences, and bonfires. But this year is different. This enormous pyre is not celebrating excess, but rather the death of it. The men heave more objects onto the fire. A painting depicting a nude woman, a box of cosmetics, a deck of playing cards, wigs, secular music sheets, books of love
this is
poetry,
just white
mirrors,
men that
sculpture,
hate everything that's fun and
horrible
enjoyable.
masks. Anything that would tempt the city to sin or decadence. A
or fun.
Of the Vanities. But what could possibly possess the center of the Renaissance, a city of art and architecture, a place of learning, to literally burn its cultural achievements? That would be Girolamo Savonarola.
This guy doesn't have fun.
Of Florence. And if you're fired up after burning through this episode, you can watch Ep 1 of our new series on the unholy Roman Emperor Frederick II right now 2 whole weeks early over on Nebula. New Year's resolution achieved. In 1492, Lorenzo de' Medici is no longer the young, vital man he had been at the time of the Pazzi conspiracy. Now he is 43 and prematurely aged through an unknown condition. His title, the Magnificent, seems a mockery now. Several branches of the Medici Bank have failed, the family's finances in turmoil. In the streets, people call him tyrant, despite the enormous amounts the family has paid to erect buildings, pay taxes, and sponsor great works of art. Yet as he teeters on the edge of eternity, it is his rival, the preacher Savonarola, one of the men who calls him tyrant, who comes to see him. There, Savonarola curses Lorenzo on his deathbed, condemning his soul to hell. Except this is a myth. Invented because the reality that Savonarola appears to have made an uneventful visit before Lorenzo died peacefully is just sort of like maddeningly anticlimactic. Because let's be clear, these two had a history, and the moment of Lorenzo's death would mark a major transition for the city. So it just sort of feels like a shift of that magnitude should have involved a dramatic confrontation. But in truth, there was no need, because all Savonarola had to do was wait. But backing up a bit, Savonarola had been born to a medical family and had pursued a career as a doctor before becoming a Dominican monk. Yet even there he found monastic life still not morally stringent enough. He became a firebrand, an itinerant preacher.
That stretched out arm kind of tells you a lot of his vibe. This man hated a lot of people and got people that felt very not seen to hate the same people. History is just repeating itself over and over.
Writing apocalyptic poetry and speaking against what he perceived as a church steeped in corruption and avarice, an approach that attracted both followers and enemies. These oratories brought him to Lorenzo's attention in 1490, when a controversial philosopher he was sheltering suggested Savonarola would be an asset to the Medici-sponsored convent of San Marco. Yet, despite moving to Florence, under Lorenzo's protection, it was very clear that Savonarola had no love for the Medici. In his preachings, he decried the city's wealth and
splendor. Is it pronounced Medici? I always thought it was Medici.
They were exploitative tyrants, he said, that spent vast sums on palaces, artwork, clothes, and carnivals, while the ordinary people of Florence starved. They were idolatrous sinners, glorying in the pagan culture of ancient Greece and Rome, commissioning nude images of biblical figures, and the Virgin Mary dressed in modern silks like a courtesan. Florence must repent, he said, and cleanse itself before God scourged the city. Though he was careful to never mention their name, it was clear that Savonarola was preaching against the Medici and their abominable Renaissance. Yet Lorenzo still allowed him to preach, probably because Savonarola was slamming the corruption of the church and papacy even harder than the Medici. But this tolerance was a critical error, because with Lorenzo's death, Savonarola would make his move. Lorenzo's successor was his son Piero, nicknamed the Unfortunate. Why? Well, because the Medici
These-
Bank was in shambles.
honestly,
and
yeah,
the
these seem like
population
good
was turning
videos
against
to
the
learn a
family.
little bit of
Meanwhile,
history.
the ranks of Savonarola's fanatical disciples, nicknamed the Weepers,
Of
swelled
course.
until they were a force on the streets. He now shouted prophecy, saying a great king would come from the north and bring reformation to the church. And hearing him, other holy men and women began reporting similar visions. And those visions were vindicated in 1494, when French King Charles VIII crossed the Alps and stormed down the peninsula to assert his right to the throne of Naples. But while the masses were in awe, some did whisper that this was hardly a prophecy, because, everyone knew Charles was intending to invade, so I guess. Piero the Unfortunate quickly buckled to Charles's demands, and this moment of weakness was the opening so many in Florence had waited for. In November, the population, whipped up by Savonarola and tired of Medici rule, rose up and expelled the Medici family. Nominally, this uprising did restore the Republic, but it was not exactly the Republic that had existed before the Medici became its shadow rulers, because, now Savonarola was its shadow ruler. In fact, when Florence needed a leadership figure to meet King Charles and convince him to pull back the troops he'd moved into Florence, it was Savonarola. And he succeeded, though not in convincing Charles that his role was to remove the Pope. See, Savonarola wasn't interested in just having a republic, but a revolutionary theocratic republic. Upon negotiating French exit from Florence, he declared that the city would be richer, more powerful.
Does this sound familiar? People who aren't fully educated, feeling like their lives are worse. A people not in power telling the people it's because of the people in power that they are failing, even though they are actually doing good for them. It's just they don't feel like they're doing good for them. Angry old man takes power, turns it into a monarchy of his own making. This is why proper education is important. If we don't learn from history, we repeat it, and we repeat it often.
And glorious, that it was the navel of Italy and would spread the Reformation of the Church throughout the peninsula. Meanwhile, Republican revolutionaries stripped Medici symbols from Florence, including destroying Botticelli's fresco of the Pazzi conspirators. Increasingly, Savonarola began speaking more explicitly about prophecy. He claimed to have predicted the deaths of Lorenzo and Pope Innocent VII, as well as the French invasion, and described intricate visions of ascending to heaven and speaking to the Virgin Mary about Florence becoming the New Jerusalem. These visions led to a wave of political and social reforms in Florence, reorganizing its government and senate to be more reliant on artisans rather than the bankers and nobles of the Medici era. But the city also passed laws against homosexuality and immodest dress, with gangs of Savonarola followers patrolling the streets to measure necklines and dress length.
God, I don't know Italian well enough to make this joke. Le ice? We are le ice.
At first, the new pope, the famously corrupt Alexander VI, just sort of let it slide. After all, he was more of a political animal than a spiritual leader, But when Florence refused to join a league against France, Alexander barred Savonarola from preaching and summoned him to Rome. Savonarola abided by the injunction for a few months, though he continued to quietly rule the city. And behind the scenes, the ironies now surrounding Savonarola's victory continued to stack up. Not only was he now the shadow ruler of Florence like the Medici before him, now he was also battling a pope like the Medici before him. More than that, he was also now steering the city's artistic taste. Granted, in a different direction by banning secular art, but encouraging religious art. Yet, Savonarola wasn't the type to stay quiet for long. And soon, he was again calling the church a whore and rallying against Alexander directly. He also began to remake the city's carnival celebration into, well, what we saw at the beginning of this episode. The first of these was known as a bonfire of the Vanities, a practice that had been around for decades, where a large bonfire was built at the center of a city and sinful objects burned. At the top of the pile, a wooden figure meant to represent Carnival itself. These events also involved parades, songs, and religious theater. This was finally too much for Alexander, and he excommunicated Savonarola shortly after the first bonfire. Yet he did manage to hold on to power long enough to have a second bonfire the next year, but by that time, much as the public had become fatigued with Medici Renaissance excess, public sentiment was also starting to curdle on Savonarola's anti-Renaissance backlash. Then when he was confronted by...
That's because, most people in society are lazy, stupid, and just want to feel good, but not actually do anything about feeling good, and just blaming, hey, you said I would feel good. I don't feel good. You bad.
By city leaders, Savonarola was convinced to retreat to his convent. His popularity fading, he did make one last grab for relevancy, claiming that he could perform miracles. But this backfired when a rival Franciscan friar challenged him to prove it in a trial by fire, with the two walking into a bonfire to see who God would protect. Savonarola declined, worrying that he just wasn't safe outside the convent, but a supporter did accept on his behalf.
Oh no.
On the appointed day, Savonarola's representative met the challenger in front of a roaring bonfire, watched by much of the city wanting to witness a miracle. These two men, ready to vindicate or condemn Savonarola, faced off, then proceeded to argue for hours about the rules of a trial by fire, like how's it actually gonna work, like how far do we have to go in, is it gonna matter how long we're in there, which God are we talking about, like really though? Not that one. But regardless, they argued for so long that a rainstorm rolled in and doused the flames. The mob, interpreting the rain as an omen against Savonarola, and angered that he did not appear himself, besieged his convent and forced him along with his two closest followers out. Arrested and tortured, Savonarola would admit to government interrogators that he'd invented his visions.
No shit.
That confession, then confessed under torture again. In prison, he wrote, penning some of the works which would later make him a luminary for later Protestant reformers. Eventually, his captors led Savonarola and his two disciples to the same place where he'd burned symbols of the Renaissance. And there,
I
they
like
declared
history.
The three heretics, tore away their Dominican robes, hung them, and burned their bodies. Savonarola's final bonfire of the Vanities.
Irony!
And now that the smoke has cleared on that historical tale, not only can I, start taking down my holiday decorations, but I can also tell you that your votes are in. And our next Extra History series will be all about the unholy Roman emperor himself, Frederick II.
And one day, I might watch that. Hey, thanks for checking out this video. Check me out on Twitch, SilverDFanng, 2 N's in Fang. Check me out on Twitter and Blue Sky under the same name. Also TikTok. Have a great night.